Perhaps each of us has once loved with all our heart, a love so deep that it makes us willing to change, to give in, and even to lose a part of ourselves just to keep the other person. Love, in its earliest bloom, is the gentlest light in life. But sometimes, that very light slowly turns into the flame that burns us, when love is no longer about sharing, but becomes a tool of control. There are relationships that don't break apart through shouting or fighting, but through long silences, through sweet but deliberate words, through those moments when we tell ourselves, if I just try a little harder, everything will be fine. But the more we try, the farther we drift from who we truly are. Every compliment, every hug, every glance, all seem like love, but sometimes they are merely a subtle chain of conditioning that makes us forget our right to emotional freedom. True love does not make us afraid. It does not force us to become someone else in order to be loved. True love is when two people remain free, yet still choose to stay, when both are strong, yet still gentle with one another. What follows is not an accusation, nor is it a lecture. It is a journey of awareness, a journey inward, where we begin to see how emotions are programmed, how trust is directed, and how we can reclaim mastery over our own hearts. Because love is not about losing, love is about realizing. There are relationships that change our habits, our choices, even the way we see the world, without us even realizing it. Not because the other person forces us, nor because we are weak, but because of something much more subtle: emotional manipulation. It is not loud, not dramatic, but it seeps quietly into every intimate moment, every sweet word, every hug that seems full of affection. The most skilled manipulators do not need to yell or give orders. They only need to make you believe that their desire is your own intention. They make you think that every decision comes from your free will, that you are living by reason, while in reality, you are being led by emotions that have been cleverly programmed. The most dangerous thing about this kind of manipulation is that it wears the mask of love. It makes you believe you are being cared for, loved, and understood. But deep inside, every gesture, every word is calculated to control your emotions and behavior. When she sighs softly as you mention a night out with friends, when her tone turns cold simply because you disagree, and then becomes gentle again the moment you give in, none of that is accidental. It is a deliberate chain of emotional programming, teaching you one lesson. When you follow her will, there is peace. When you resist, you lose warmth. Day by day, week by week, you begin to change small decisions, choosing to stay home instead of going out, choosing silence instead of argument, choosing to comply instead of listening to yourself. Gradually, you reorganize your whole life around another person's desires, while still believing that you are in control. The frightening thing is that this process never feels like control. On the contrary, you feel loved, cared for, appreciated. The most sophisticated control is when the controlled person feels grateful. That is when love turns into a tool, no longer a connection between two free souls, but an invisible chain woven from emotions, fear of loss, and the need for validation. You no longer love because you want to love, but because you are afraid of losing the feeling of love, even when it is no longer real. Not all forms of control take the shape of violence. Sometimes, a gentle smile, a warm voice, or a caring gaze can become the strongest tools of manipulation. A person doesn't need to threaten you to make you change. Just a well-timed sigh of disappointment, a silence held long enough, or a cleverly placed compliment. And suddenly, you begin to adjust yourself in the direction they want. She doesn't give orders. She makes you want to do what she expects. No demands, no enforcement. She simply plants a subtle feeling. You want to make her happy, to see that smile, to prove that you are the kind of man good enough to deserve this love. That is the essence of subtle manipulation, making you submit through emotion, not reason. One of the most common mechanisms is the command within the compliment. At first, she awakens your confidence with sweet and loving words. You're so smart. I always trust your decisions. You really are the kind of strong man everyone admires. Those words are like honey, softening your defenses. When emotions are high, when your ego is being gently stroked, she quietly adds a suggestion. A man as intelligent as you will surely understand me. Or, you're someone who always knows what's right, aren't you? At that moment, you don't hear an order. You only feel recognition. But in truth, you've been programmed to act exactly the way she wants. Because if you refuse, you'll feel as though you're betraying the very admirable image she just attached to you. This kind of manipulation doesn't hurt immediately. On the contrary, it makes you feel loved, encouraged. You believe that this relationship helps you become a better, stronger man. But in reality, you are being trained to respond according to someone else's pattern. Every time you agree, you are rewarded with tenderness. Every time you resist, you face coldness and silence. Gradually, your brain starts associating obedience with happiness and sees compliance as something natural. What once seemed like love has, in fact, turned into a chain of behavioral conditioning, where you are being guided without even realizing it. Every man carries within himself an image of who he is: strong, calm, rational, the protector and the leader. Those values are beautiful because they create confidence and a sense of responsibility. However, in the hands of someone who knows how to manipulate, those very virtues become deadly weaknesses. The most sophisticated manipulation doesn't attack you from the outside. It comes from within, from the pride you use to define yourself. A skillful woman will never say, "You're wrong." She will say, "A strong man like you wouldn't let such a small thing affect him, right?" At first glance, it sounds like a compliment, but in truth, it's a sweet challenge. Because if you react, you'll see yourself as weak, and if you stay silent, she gets what she wants. She doesn't need to attack your pride. She reshapes it to serve her purpose. A real man doesn't get jealous. A good husband always pampers his wife. A strong man knows how to control himself. And those statements sound reasonable, but every time you hear them, the line between righteousness and submission fades just a little more. By linking moral standards to gender, she forces you to comply just to avoid feeling guilty. You can't refuse and still keep the image of a good man, not in her eyes, and not even in your own. And so, each choice, each decision, each reaction of yours becomes adjusted by fear. Fear of being seen as petty, fear of being called selfish, fear of not being man enough. She doesn't need to hold a leash, because you're already holding it yourself, tied by your own pride. She doesn't need to threaten you, because you fear losing the image of the ideal man you believe she loves. You control yourself before she even has to. And at that very moment, your freedom has been replaced by submission, disguised as honor. This kind of manipulation is dangerous because it doesn't make you feel weak. On the contrary, you feel as though you're doing the right thing, being noble, being mature. But that's only an illusion created by the weaponization of male pride, where confidence is exploited and integrity becomes a tool of control. No one is manipulated overnight. Sophisticated control doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes like a slow, steady drizzle, seeping into every corner of your soul. At first, it's small, gentle, even wrapped in sweetness and logic. But it's that very logic that disarms you, and one day, you look back and realize you've changed, quietly, bit by bit. She starts with small requests. Could you stay home tonight? I don't think your friend is good for you. I just want us to spend more time together. It all sounds so reasonable, so loving. You agree, because you care, because you want to make her happy, because you think it's just something small. But each time you give in, she learns what softens you. And so the next request goes deeper, bolder, yet still wrapped in the sweetness of care and affection. Over time, you begin to be conditioned. Each time you give in, you're rewarded with affection, praise, tenderness. Your brain records obedience in love. But when you resist, the air grows cold. Her tone turns distant. Her eyes fill with disappointment. Your brain records again. Refusal, a loss of affection. Yet you don't even realize when it started, when you began to fear losing that feeling of being loved. And that very fear becomes the invisible chain that binds you. Like Pavlov's experiment, where the dog learned to salivate at the sound of a bell, you too begin to react by conditioning. When you hear her sad voice, you rush to comfort her. When you see her fall silent, you hurry to apologize, even before knowing what you did wrong. You no longer act out of choice, but out of fear of losing the sense of safety she once gave you. The heartbreaking part is this: you still believe it's love. Because every time you do what she wants, she becomes once again that gentle, sweet, and warm woman you love. It's precisely that emotional reward and punishment cycle that creates an addiction loop, making you dependent on her, like an addict craving the next dose of approval. She doesn't need to threaten or command anymore, because now you've become the one who controls yourself. You avoid doing anything that might upset her. You anticipate her reactions to adjust your behavior. You live within the boundaries drawn by her smiles and tears. And thus, submission is no longer an action. It has become a habit. Language is the most powerful tool humanity has ever created. It can heal, or it can control. A single sentence that seems harmless can secretly plant a code in the subconscious, making the listener act in ways they do not realize. And in relationships, especially those built on emotional dependency, language becomes the perfect tool of manipulation. She doesn't need to force you to do anything. All she has to do is choose her words carefully. You're not the jealous type, right? It sounds like a compliment, but in reality, it's a disguised command. If you get jealous, you'll feel as if you're betraying the image she just painted of you. Or she might say, I know you'll understand me. And just like that, even if you're uncomfortable, your brain is already programmed to understand her, because refusal would mean no longer being the rational, tolerant man she has always described. Language, in the hands of a manipulator, is not a tool of communication. It's a weapon of perception. Every compliment carries a hidden condition. You're so generous means keep forgiving. You're so strong means don't pay attention to this anymore. You're a good man means do the right thing, my way. Each of those honeyed phrases binds your behavior and your identity, making you feel obligated to live up to the role she has assigned to you. Even more dangerously, that language seeps into your own inner voice. When conflict arises, you hear yourself thinking, I shouldn't be jealous. I need to stay calm. I should understand her. But if you look deeper, you'll realize those are no longer your thoughts. They are the echoes of her words. She didn't just speak to you, she spoke inside you. The power of linguistic manipulation lies in making the victim convince themselves. You're not forced, you agree. No one commands, but you still act. That is the art of emotional language programming, where words are not meant to communicate, but to elicit reaction. Once the mind is led by language, reason fades. You begin to believe that submission is your choice, that silence is noble, that endurance is love. And at that point, the one who holds the greatest power in the relationship is not the one who speaks louder, but the one who knows how to say the right words, at the right time, with the right emotion. It's not only individuals who manipulate. Society itself also plays a role in programming men's emotions. From childhood, boys are taught, men don't cry. You must be strong, you must endure. And they grow up believing that showing emotion is weakness, that expressing fear is cowardice, and that reacting emotionally means losing control. And those very beliefs become the most dangerous weapons in the hands of someone who knows how to exploit them. When a man believes he must always stay calm, always be understanding, he suppresses his true emotions, even when he's in pain. When he believes a good man never argues, he chooses silence over conversation. And when society glorifies the rational man, untouched by emotion, he begins to censor even his own suffering. At that moment, silence becomes an invisible shackle. Anytime he tries to speak about feeling manipulated or treated unfairly, the world around him quickly labels him. You're too weak. You're too controlling. You're being overly sensitive. And the shame cultivated by society strips him of the right to speak his truth. And so the manipulator doesn't even need to say a word. Society will do the rest. That kind of bondage doesn't just come from the outside, it seeps deep into the mind. Many men begin to believe that enduring is love, yielding is kindness, sacrifice is duty. And when submission is praised as a virtue of good men, saying no becomes a sin. To escape that spiral, you don't need to become cold or indifferent. On the contrary, what you need most is to reconnect with your true emotions. Learn to recognize when you're feeling guilty, when you're afraid of loss, and when you're agreeing just to keep the peace. Because every act of manipulation begins the moment you betray your own authentic feelings. True strength doesn't lie in being emotionless, it lies in controlling your reactions. When she tries to make you feel guilty, ask yourself, is this truly fair? When you're afraid of losing love, remember, true love doesn't need fear to survive. And when someone says men shouldn't be weak, smile. Because only those who dare to face their pain are truly strong. Society may have silenced men, but awareness can set them free. Once you understand that emotions are not your enemy, but your compass, no one, not even the person you love, can use them to control you anymore. True freedom doesn't begin with action, it begins with awareness. A man can only be manipulated when he hasn't realized that he's being controlled. Once the light of awareness is turned on, the darkness of domination disappears. No arguments, no battles, only clarity. Emotional manipulation always lives in the shadows of the unconscious. It feeds on unawareness, on the automatic reactions of the heart when touched by fear, guilt, or the need to be loved. That's why the key to freedom is not fighting others, but seeing through yourself. Pay attention. Whenever you feel guilty, stop and ask, who is making me feel this way? Whenever you fear losing love, ask, what kind of love requires fear to exist? And whenever a compliment makes you agree too easily, remind yourself, am I truly being appreciated, or am I being led? When you observe without reacting, the power of manipulation dissolves. Someone trying to control your emotions can only succeed if you play their game. When you argue, defend yourself, or rush to correct your behavior just to be loved again. But if you quietly observe, if you see clearly how the mechanism works, the game loses its player. And without a player, the game ends. The important thing is not to turn awareness into a weapon for revenge. The goal is not to defeat anyone, but to liberate yourself. You don't need to leave the person you love, only the motivation to be controlled. Detach yourself from the need for validation, from the fear of rejection, from dependence on another's gaze. Then you'll realize love is still there, but this time it no longer imprisons you. True love doesn't need to conquer anyone or prove anything. It doesn't demand submission or fear. It is the free choice of two liberated souls. Those who are mature in love don't need to control, because they understand. When two people are both awake, love itself becomes the safest place to be. And so, in the end, you don't need to fight anyone. You only need to wake up. Awareness is light. Light is not meant to burn. It is meant to illuminate. When you begin to see with that clarity, every form of manipulation becomes meaningless. Because no one can control a soul that knows how to observe itself. In the end, love is not a power struggle, nor a battle of right and wrong. True love is like a garden, a place where both people plant, nurture, and give each other the space to grow. When you begin to see the invisible strings that once bound you, that's also when you begin to learn how to love again, more consciously, more compassionately. Because love without freedom is not love, it is fear wrapped in tenderness. Love without selfhood is not connection, it is loss. Love is only truly beautiful when it allows you to be yourself and still be loved. If one day you realize you've gone too far from who you really are, do not resent it. Be grateful that you've finally seen it. Seeing is the first step toward freedom. And from that moment, you'll understand. No one can control a soul that knows how to observe itself. No one can manipulate a heart that has learned to love without losing itself. Let the love within you return to being light, not chains. Let your gentleness be strength, not weakness. And let awareness guide you, because only then can love truly set you free instead of imprisoning you. Because love is not meant to control, it is meant to set both hearts free.